first sound I heard that night wasn't knocking. It was a heavy thud against the side of the cabin, like something or someone had just slammed their shoulder into the wall. For a few seconds, I stayed completely still in bed, staring into the darkness and trying to convince myself I imagined it. But then it happened again. Another thud, harder this time. And that was the exact moment I realized our quiet spring break getaway in the woods might have been the worst decision we'd ever made. This happened about 4 years ago during spring break. My girlfriend Anna had been talking for months about taking a trip somewhere quiet. Nothing fancy. No crowded beaches or loud parties. Just a peaceful place where we could unplug for a few days and relax. She kept saying she wanted to rent a cabin somewhere deep in the woods, somewhere far away from people. At the time, that sounded perfect. Anna's younger brother Hunter was staying with us during his college break, so he decided to come along too. Hunter and I got along pretty well, and honestly, the more people on a trip, the better. I found the cabin online after a few hours of searching. Looking back now, there were two details that should have immediately made me suspicious. First, the place was extremely secluded. Second, it was unbelievably cheap. But at the time, I didn't think much about it. It was listed as a small private cabin on several acres of land surrounded by forest. No nearby neighbors, no visible roads from the property. That sounded peaceful to me. So we booked it for the weekend. We arrived Friday evening right around sunset. The last 20 minutes of the drive had been on a narrow dirt road that twisted through thick forest. The trees were so dense that the sunlight barely reached the ground. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the cabin looked exactly like the photos online. Small, wooden, quiet. It actually looked pretty nice. There was a small porch in the front and a clearing around the house, but beyond that, it was nothing but forest in every direction. One thing I did notice right away was an outbuilding about 30 yards away from the cabin. It looked like a large storage shed. Hunter walked over to it while Anna and I were unloading bags from the car. After a few seconds, he called out to us, "Hey, this lock looks brand new." I walked over and saw what he meant. The shed door had a thick padlock on it that looked like it had been installed recently. Hunter rattled it a little before shrugging. "Probably tools or equipment," I said. We didn't think much more about it. It was getting dark quickly, and we were all hungry. Inside, the cabin was cozy and simple. A small kitchen, a living room, one bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. We spent the first couple hours cooking dinner and relaxing. Later that night, we sat on the porch with a couple drinks, listening to the sounds of the forest. And the forest was loud, way louder than I expected. There were frogs, insects, and other sounds I couldn't even identify, all blending together into this constant wall of noise. It was actually kind of relaxing. Eventually, we all went to bed. Sometime later that night, it started raining lightly. The rain mixed with the sounds of the forest and created this steady background noise that made it easy to fall asleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. A loud thud against the outside wall of the cabin. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark ceiling. Maybe a branch fell, I thought. The wind could have knocked something loose. But then I heard it again. Another thud, this time closer. My heart started beating faster. I slowly sat up in bed and looked over at Anna. She was still asleep. I checked my phone, 2:14 a.m. I lay there for another minute, listening carefully. Nothing, just the rain and the distant sounds of insects. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer brushing against the cabin. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Eventually, I decided to check outside. I grabbed the flashlight we had brought and walked quietly into the living room. The windows were dark and reflective because of the rain, so it was hard to see much. But when I shined the flashlight toward the clearing outside, something caught my attention. Footprints. They were faint, but visible in the wet dirt near the shed. Human footprints. I immediately felt a chill run through my body. Those couldn't have been ours. None of us had gone outside since the rain started. At least, not that I knew of. My first thought was Hunter. Maybe he had stepped outside for some reason earlier. But that didn't make much sense either. And even if he had, why would he be walking around the shed in the middle of the night? I stared at the footprints for another few seconds before turning off the flashlight. There was no way I was going outside to investigate, not at 2 a.m. in the middle of the woods. Instead, I double-checked that the front and back doors were locked. Then I went back to bed. For a while, I just lay there awake, listening. Eventually, the exhaustion caught up to me, and I drifted back to sleep. But a few hours later, I woke up again, this time to a sound that made my stomach drop instantly. Knocking. Slow, heavy knocking on the front door. At first, I thought I might still be dreaming, but then it came again. 3 solid knocks. Anna sat up beside me. "What was that?" she whispered. I checked my phone again. 4:03 a.m. No one should be knocking on a cabin door in the middle of nowhere at 4 in the morning. My heart was pounding now. I got out of bed and walked slowly into the living room. The knocking came again. "Hello?" I called through the door. A man's voice answered almost immediately. "Forest Ranger, I need to do a quick welfare check." Something about the tone of his voice made me uneasy. It sounded rehearsed. I hesitated. "We're fine," I said. "Everything's okay." There was a short pause. Then he spoke again. "I still need to ask you a few questions." At that point, Hunter had come out of his room. He stood behind me, whispering quietly. "What's going on?" I leaned closer to him. "Call the police," I whispered. Hunter nodded and quietly walked back toward the bedroom. Meanwhile, the man outside knocked again, louder this time. "Sir, I need you to open the door." "I'm not opening the door," I said firmly. Another pause. Then his voice changed. The calm tone was gone. "You need to comply. Open the door." Anna suddenly shouted from the hallway. "Go away!" The reaction was immediate. The man slammed his fist against the door. Hard. "Open the door." Hunter rushed back into the room. "The police said there aren't any rangers out here," he whispered. My stomach dropped. Outside, the man started kicking the door. The entire frame shook. Anna ran into the bathroom and locked the door like I told her. Hunter and I grabbed the biggest kitchen knives we could find. We stood in the living room listening as the man stomped around the outside of the cabin. Then suddenly, crash! A window shattered. Glass exploded across the floor as a large rock landed inside the living room. I froze. For several seconds, we just stood there staring at the broken window, expecting the man to climb through it. But he didn't. Everything went silent. Then, faintly in the distance, I heard something. Sirens. Police sirens. The sound grew louder quickly, and then, nothing. The man was gone. When the police arrived minutes later, they searched the surrounding woods but couldn't find anyone. No footprints. No vehicle. Nothing. It was like the guy had disappeared into the forest. The officers told us the safest thing to do was pack up and leave. We didn't argue. Within 20 minutes, we were on the road heading back toward the highway. But one thought kept repeating in my mind the entire drive home. That man knew we were there, in a cabin hidden deep in the woods that barely anyone even knew existed. And to this day, I still don't know how. If that story gave you chills, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is all about real, disturbing experiences just like this one. The last time I saw my friend Sahil walk into that club, he was smiling, laughing, and talking about how this was going to be the best night of the trip. 2 hours later, we found him stumbling out of the darkness toward us, barely able to walk, his face swollen, his shirt hanging off his body like someone had tried to rip it off. At first, we thought he'd gotten into a bar fight, but when he finally told us what really happened to him that night, every single one of us realized something much worse had almost happened. This all took place back in 2016, during my senior year of college. At our school, spring break was a huge deal, especially if you were involved in Greek life. I was in a fraternity called TKE, and every year a large group of guys from our chapter would plan a trip with 1 or 2 sororities we were close with. These trips were always chaotic in the best way possible. Imagine 30 or 40 college students crammed into the same resort for a week with nothing to do but party, explore, and recover from the previous night. That particular year, someone suggested going to the Pacific coast of Mexico. Within a couple of weeks, the plan had grown into something massive. By the time everything was booked, there were nearly 40 of us staying at the same resort. The place was beautiful. Palm trees, beaches, warm air, and music everywhere. The entire town seemed built around tourists, and during spring break, the streets were packed with college students from all over the United States. For the first few days, everything was exactly what you'd expect. Beach during the day, clubs at night, sleep whenever you could. The main person in this story isn't actually me, though. It's my friend Sahil. Sahil was one of those people who could turn even the simplest situation into chaos. He had an incredible personality. Everyone liked him, but he also had absolutely zero sense of caution. If there was a risky decision to be made, Sahil would almost always make it, and he'd usually do it with a huge grin on his face. About 4 days into the trip, a big group of us decided to hit one of the largest clubs in the city. The place was massive. 3 different floors, multiple bars, flashing lights everywhere, and music so loud you could feel the bass in your chest. We were having an amazing time. Drinks were flowing, people were dancing, and the energy in the room was wild. At some point during the night, I noticed Sahil scanning the crowd near the bar. I already knew that look. He was searching for something. I leaned over and asked him what he was doing. He shrugged and said quietly, "Just seeing if anyone knows where to get something stronger." Immediately, a couple of us told him to drop it. We were in another country, none of us spoke Spanish, and the city had a reputation for being a little dangerous if you weren't careful. Sahil laughed and said he was just joking, but I knew him too well to believe that. For a while, we kept an eye on him, but the club was enormous and packed with people. Eventually, everyone got distracted. Someone started a drinking game near the dance floor. Another group went outside to smoke. Before long, nobody really knew where Sahil was anymore. At the time, that didn't seem unusual. He disappeared into crowds all the time. Hours passed. The night kept going. Eventually, someone asked, "Hey, where's Sahil?" That's when we realized nobody had seen him in a long time. We started texting him. No response. We tried calling, straight to voicemail. That was strange. Sahil was obsessed with his phone. He never let the battery die. We searched around the club for a while, but it was nearly impossible in a place that crowded. Eventually, we decided to head back to the resort. We figured he had probably left early and gone back to the room. Outside the club, the streets were packed with people trying to get rides. Cars were honking. Music was blasting from nearby bars. It was chaos. A few of us walked about a block away from the crowd to request a ride on our phones. While we were standing there waiting, someone suddenly pointed down the street. "Is that Sahil?" At first, I couldn't tell, but then I saw him. He was stumbling toward us out of the darkness. The closer he got, the worse he looked. His shirt was almost completely torn off. One side of his face was badly swollen. There was blood on his lip, and he was limping. All of us ran toward him. "What the hell happened to you?" He looked exhausted and shaken. "Let's just get back to the hotel," he said quietly. We helped him into the car when our ride arrived. The entire ride back was silent. Once we got to the resort and inside the room, we sat him down and finally got the full story. Earlier in the night, while we were all dancing near the bar, Sahil had noticed a short guy standing nearby. The guy barely spoke English, but he had a friend with him who was translating. Sahil made it pretty clear what he was looking for. At first, the translator seemed hesitant, but then the shorter guy pulled out a small sample and showed it to him. Sahil said he should have walked away right then. Something about the situation felt wrong, but curiosity got the better of him. He tried a little of the sample, and according to him, it was real. After that, the guy told Sahil they couldn't do business inside the club. He said they needed to step outside. Sahil knew it was a bad idea, but he went anyway. They walked out a side exit where a car was parked nearby. Before Sahil fully understood what was happening, the 2 men suddenly grabbed him and shoved him into the back seat. The doors slammed shut and the car took off. Sahil said his heart started racing immediately. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. The men in the front seats began going through his pockets. They took his wallet, his cash, and his phone. When he tried to fight back, they started hitting him hard. They punched him repeatedly until he stopped resisting. At some point, they smashed his phone against the seat until it broke. Then, they kept driving. Sahil had no idea where they were going. The city lights slowly disappeared behind them. That's when he started thinking the worst. He genuinely thought he might never see us again. At one point during the drive, one of the men suddenly asked him a question through the translator. "Why are there so many Americans here right now?" Sahil, still dazed from the beating, answered honestly. He told them about spring break. He told them there were dozens of college students staying at the same resort. He mentioned the large group we were with. Apparently, that information made the two men start talking quickly in Spanish. Sahil couldn't understand them, but he could tell the conversation had changed. About 10 minutes later, the car suddenly pulled over. One of the men opened the door and shoved Sahil out onto the side of the road. He hit the pavement hard. Then the car sped away. Just like that. Sahil said he had no idea where he was. The road was dark and empty. His phone was gone. His money was gone. He had no way to call anyone. So he did the only thing he could think of. He started walking. For nearly 40 minutes, he walked along that road, hoping he was heading back toward the city. By pure luck, he eventually started seeing familiar buildings again. That's when he found us. When Sahil finished telling the story, the room was completely silent. None of us really knew what to say. One wrong decision had nearly cost him everything. To this day, we still talk about how incredibly lucky he was, because if those men had decided not to let him go that night, we might never have seen him again. Before we jump into the final story, if you're enjoying these real horror experiences, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I upload new true horror stories regularly, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The moment everyone in that house stopped talking and turned to look at me at the exact same time, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No one shouted. No one moved toward me. But the sudden silence in that room, full of strangers, felt like a warning I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I realized the biggest mistake we had made that entire spring break trip was trusting the invitation that brought us there in the first place. This happened during my junior year of college, a few years before I graduated. I've always been the kind of person who pays attention to details. Some people call it being observant. Others say I overthink things. Personally, I think it's somewhere in the middle. But on that trip, those instincts probably saved us. My girlfriend at the time, Anna, had a friend named Lena. Lena was extremely social. She always seemed to know about every party, every event, and every trip that people were planning. If something exciting was happening anywhere near campus, Lena usually heard about it first. So when she came to Anna with a spring break idea, no one questioned it. According to Lena, one of her sorority friends was organizing a huge lake house trip out in the Ozarks. A big house, dozens of college students, a full week of parties by the water. It sounded like a typical spring break plan. Lena asked if the four of us wanted to join. That meant me, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend Colby. Colby offered to drive since he had the largest car. The drive took several hours, but it was actually pretty enjoyable. Everyone was in a great mood. Music playing, windows down, snacks getting passed around the car. The final stretch of the drive took us down a long, winding road that wrapped around a large lake. There were very few houses out there, just trees, water, and quiet roads. When we finally reached the property around 5 in the afternoon, I immediately noticed something surprising. The house was huge, much bigger than Lena had described. It sat right on the edge of the lake with a massive wraparound deck and a long wooden dock stretching out over the water. But something else caught my attention too. Cars. A lot of them. Lena had told us maybe 15 or 20 people would be there. But just from a quick glance, I counted at least 25 cars already parked around the property. Some were even lined up along the side of the road because the driveway was full. Colby ended up parking about 50 yards away. When we walked up to the front steps, a guy around our age was standing near the entrance. He greeted us immediately. Friendly smile, confident posture. He introduced himself as the host of the house. I don't remember his name, so I'll just call him the host. The first thing I noticed about him was how rehearsed he sounded. Like he had delivered the same explanation many times already. He walked us through a list of house rules, where the bedrooms were, where drinks were kept, which doors stayed locked. Then he brought up something unexpected: car keys. He explained that the roads around the lake were narrow and dangerous at night, especially after people had been drinking. Because of that, he said everyone staying at the house had to leave their car keys in a bowl by the front door. He made it sound like a safety policy. Colby didn't seem to care. He shrugged and dropped his keys into a large bowl sitting on a small table near the entrance. When I looked inside the bowl, I saw dozens of other car keys already sitting there. That made it seem legitimate. So we went inside. The house was packed with people. Music was playing. Groups of students were sitting around talking, drinking, and playing games. It looked like any other college party. We found our room upstairs, dropped off our bags, and came back down to join everyone. Lena was eager to find the friend who had invited her, but after walking through the entire house twice, she couldn't find her. At first, we assumed the girl was just somewhere outside, but as the night went on, Lena admitted something strange. She didn't recognize anyone in the house. Not one person. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though. Colby and I grabbed beers and started playing pool with a few guys in the living room. Anna and Lena eventually joined a group of girls sitting near the windows. The night was actually pretty fun. People were laughing, drinking, and talking. But there was one thing I couldn't stop noticing. The host. He wasn't partying like everyone else. Instead, he was constantly walking around the house, watching, checking on things. At one point, I even saw him standing near the back door, writing something down on a clipboard. An actual clipboard with paper. It felt weird seeing that at a college party. Another thing started bothering me as the night went on. Most of the people there didn't seem to know each other. They had arrived in small groups like we did, 2 or 3 people at a time. But aside from about 10 individuals who clearly knew each other, everyone else seemed like strangers. That alone wasn't alarming, but it stuck in my mind. The first night ended without anything major happening. Everyone went to sleep sometime after midnight. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I went downstairs and made some coffee. Then I stepped outside onto the deck to enjoy the quiet lake view. While I was sitting there, I noticed something odd. The bowl of car keys near the front door was gone. At first, I assumed the host had moved it somewhere else. Still, I made a mental note of it. About an hour later, I saw a couple leaving the house with their bags. They said goodbye to a few people and got into their car. I watched them drive down the road until they disappeared around the bend. Nothing strange about that. But later that night, something happened that made my stomach turn. We were all sitting around a bonfire near the lake. People were laughing, passing drinks around, telling stories. At some point, I looked across the fire and noticed a couple sitting together on the other side. It took me a second to realize something. I recognized them. They were the same couple I had watched leave that morning. I stared at them for several seconds. I was absolutely certain it was them. But their car had left. I had watched it drive away. Confused, I got up and walked toward the driveway. When I checked the area where their car had been parked earlier, it was empty, exactly like I expected. But when I returned to the bonfire, the couple was gone. Just gone. I asked Anna if she had seen them. She looked at me like I was imagining things. I tried to forget about it, but the thought kept bothering me. The next morning, I decided to take a walk down the road. I told everyone I just wanted to get some fresh air. About a quarter-mile away from the house, I found a small maintenance shed near the road, and parked right beside it was the couple's car, the same one I had watched leave the property the day before. My heart started racing. Why would someone pretend to leave only to park their car down the road? I stood there for a long time staring at it. Eventually, I turned around and walked back to the house. Later that day, I found the couple standing near the dock. I walked right up to them and asked directly if they had left the property the previous morning. They both gave me confused looks and denied it immediately. But something about their reaction felt forced, like I had said something I wasn't supposed to say. While we were talking, I noticed something else. People around us had gone quiet, not completely silent, but quieter, like they were listening. Anna eventually walked over and pulled me away from the conversation. Later, I told her everything. To my surprise, she admitted she had noticed strange things too. Some of the girls she talked to had almost identical stories about how they were invited. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I had made up my mind. We needed to leave. Immediately. When we went downstairs for breakfast, I felt something unsettling. People were watching me. Not openly, but enough that I noticed. I walked straight up to the host and told him we needed our car keys. He smiled politely at first. Then he started asking questions. Why were we leaving? Was something wrong? Did we want to stay for the boat party planned that evening? I repeated myself. I need our keys. The entire room had gone quiet again. Finally, the host nodded. He told me to follow him. When Anna tried to come with us, he raised his hand sharply and told her to stay. His voice was suddenly aggressive. I followed him through several hallways until we reached a small room. Inside were dozens of keys hanging on hooks. Without asking which ones were mine, he picked them off the wall and handed them to me. Then he said something that still gives me chills. "You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. I grabbed the keys and walked straight back to my friends. Within 10 minutes, we were packed and heading to the car. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. About a dozen people were standing on the deck, perfectly still, watching us leave, not talking, not waving, just watching. And even now, years later, I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed one more night. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for listening. If you enjoy true horror stories like these, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. And if you have a scary or disturbing story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments. I read them all, and some of them might even appear in a future video.